Hey guys, welcome to The Grey Escape. I'm Natalie Gray, and this episode is brought to you by westcoastlondon.com. Individually hand spray painted clothing inspired by things that inspire. Visit westcoastlondon.com, enter coupon code ESCAPE, and save 10% off your order. Right now, it's time for the ultimate hardcore writers episode, part 2. I'll tell you more right after this. What do you want to write? The perfect screenplay? An airtight sitcom? Or maybe you're bold enough to forge your own original spec pilot? Whatever the goal, whatever the dream, my guest today has information that will help you on your journey, as it is helping me on mine. In this episode, the ultimate hardcore writers episode, part 2, my first ever 2-part series, writer and script editor Andrew Ellard returns, the man who helps wrangle the genius of writing gods who forge shows like Red Dwarf, The IT Crowd, Miranda, and more. He's here right now to share more of his insights, more of his wisdom, and spoiler alert, in this episode, I may reveal to Andrew and to you the rather homespun method I used to write my very first screenplay. Okay, we're going to go right now, diving in to where we left off in part 1, where I noted that Andrew has really hot girls in his movie, the movie he wrote after death. He then remarked that this wasn't the plan, and this is where we jump in right now, part 2 of the ultimate hardcore writers episode. And our very special guest, Andrew Ellard.
But more importantly, they're 4 very defined, separate individual characters who control the narrative of the movie. And yeah, so anyway. When writing that film, it came to me as a logistical exercise, right? It came to me as, listen, we've already got the location. The cabin has already been found. This house on the beach, this beach. And they'd got footage that they'd shot. So I already knew what the location looked like, and I would write the script into that location. And I knew that we didn't have huge budgets for blood bags and squibs and slicing off limbs or anything like that. So I didn't put any of that stuff in there. Instead, we use slightly different kinds of physical discomfort and horror. So I wrote it all to be logistical and also I love the challenge of it. Can you do an entire story that's mostly one location, 5 characters? Yes, of course you can, but can you keep it interesting? Can you not bore people? And the reviews have ranged from "we completely pulled it off" to "this is so dull." So somewhere in the middle lies the truth of what the movie is. But in amongst all of that practical challenge, somewhere along the line as I was writing it, it started to be about something else. It started to be about this religious stuff that I was angry about. It started to be about a certain kind of misogyny, a certain kind of way certain kinds of men think about women. I didn't know that was what I was going to write about. I didn't sit there planning to write any of those things particularly. It's just that those things come out of what was being crafted. And that's finding your voice, right? This is the stuff I'm pissed off about.
Yeah, this is what I care about.
Yeah, it's really hard to sit down and say, I'm going to write a thing about the difficulties of modern feminism, right? And make that an interesting story and narrative. You start with a story idea. Of course you start with a story idea. But if you trust to your own voice, just get past execution. And that's about making your narratives and your rhythms more complex. Because if you write very simple setup and payoff jokes, it's really hard to have a subtext in that. If you write a brilliantly funny story, the difference between a setup and a payoff gag and a 2-minute Eddie Izzard rant, right? That rant has got pockets and windows and insight, and he's angry about things, he's curious about things, he's talking about stuff. It's very hard in a one-liner to say that that's about much of anything. Although sometimes, Jimmy Carr will do a one-liner that's so horribly, uncomfortably sexist or body fascistic or whatever. So, you know, and that's because those jokes sometimes reach for truisms that aren't true and are unfair and whatever. I'm using Jimmy Carr as an example. There are worse examples. But the more you write with complexity, the more you muddy things up. I see a lot of sitcom scripts which are really straightforward. Like, this character wants this. He tries once, he fails, he tries again, and he gets it. And that's fine. But you haven't challenged much of anything. And the more you challenge your character, the more they fight back. And the more you find, by accident, you're writing about something else as well. You're writing about relationships between men and women, fathers and sons, between work colleagues. You're starting to kick around some bigger ideas.
Right. The guts is coming
yeah, and that's about complexity. I do think that's not about complexity in like twisty-turny narrative, because sometimes that can be just as shallow. You know, the narrative twists 17 times, and you get to the end and you go, well, I mean, I understood it all. It was hard to follow, but I followed it. It wasn't about anything. Whereas sometimes hard to follow, you look at Primer or Upstream Color, the Shane Carruth who makes those movies. They are so desperately about something whilst also not being very, very clear. But you keep reaching for the clarity. But in the meantime, you're finding interesting conversations going on about science and humans and interaction and how we form part of a system that influences each other and all those kinds of things. It's when we go, this technically makes sense as a plot. I've finished, that you realise you haven't really found your voice yet. All you've done is found a mechanic.
Right.
You know.
Right. Do you think writers can write anything? I mean, you're predominantly comedy, but you've just knocked out this horror thriller screenplay.
Yeah, it depends on the writer, but I think you find your natural. It would be hard to argue. Joss Whedon wrote episodes of Roseanne, and now he's doing Avengers, and in the middle he did a Shakespeare adaptation. It's very hard to argue that guy belongs.
Some people just show off.
Yeah,
I mean,
and some people, you know, just have a myriad of talent. But I do think I can so imagine Russell T Davies, who is one of the best dramatic writers currently working, right? And by the way, it's criminal how few people watched Cucumber, because that was such a great show. And it just didn't catch people right. I would blame the advertising campaign completely, because it looked like an advert for Tesco's.
With the cucumber.
Yeah.
Literally with a cucumber.
With a cucumber and a banana. And you don't... Yeah. And yet, if you'd have sold everyone on, see, this is Henry. He's a really conflicted and difficult, but interesting and funny and likable character. Henry's about to make his life spontaneously combust. He's about to blow it up, and that is going to have huge repercussions. That's great. That's a show I would turn up for straight away. And they didn't sell me that. They sold me something about a cucumber.
Wasn't that show part of a kind of never been done before trifecta of shows that came out, all to do with homosexuality?
And all LGB, blah, blah, blah,
all the issues.
Yeah. So they did a great story with a trans character.
So
and,
because it was 3 different networks as well.
Yeah, it was Channel 4 for Cucumber, E4 for Banana, and then online they had the documentaries, Tofu. And, you know, it's one of those things that seems great, like inventively, it just seems great. And actually, they were all really good shows. It's just, you realise there's a gap between how a show is made and what it actually is and how it is marketed. And if you don't market it to people, it doesn't matter how great it is, because nobody damn well sees it.
Do you think the British public are ready?
Yeah, I mean, God, Queer as Folk is one of the best things that got made in the 90s, and it was the 90s.
I loved that show. The American version I watched,
right.
Of course.
The British version is stormingly good. And at the time it was like, oh my God, it's so controversial. It's 15, 20 years on now. We've all calmed the hell down about it. Yeah, there is enough. It was bright and colourful and engaging and exciting. The characters were funny. All you got to do is get people to watch it. And with Queer as Folk, it was relatively easy, I think, to get people to watch it, because it was promoted the right way. And I don't think Cucumber Banana was. Anyway, I've wandered from the point. Russell is a brilliant, brilliant writer, and he can do anything. His sci-fi, Doctor Who, it's not science fiction, it's science fantasy. It's fantasy-fi. It's not really beholden to science. It's beholden to gut feeling about things. Oh, you can. The things from love can save someone because of sci-fi reasons. That's what he's really writing about, you know, the same things. It's just with that lovely fantasy metaphor over the top. But he writes fantasy science fiction incredibly well. He writes human drama incredibly well. If you gave him a half-hour sitcom, he'd knock it out of the park. He's so funny. His stuff is so truthfully funny. He doesn't struggle to make you laugh. It seems effortless. I would love to watch him do a half-hour live-action sitcom. I think it would be the best thing on TV.
Well, I was going to ask you who you'd want to work with, so that kind of answers that.
I mean, that's true. I'd love to do. But I don't think I'm the right script editor for a Russell T Davies, because Russell's not worried about... There's a brilliant part in his in the Writer's Tale book where he talks about rewatching the season finale from Doctor Who Season 3, which is where the Master takes over the whole Earth. And he says, I was watching it back, and I just realised, from one point of view, it must be incredibly unsatisfying, because I just hit an undo button and everything goes back to... that's not been built to, that's not been set. The way that it all works hasn't been set up strongly enough. From a screenwriting rules point of view, I've broken all the rules. And then he says, you know what, I don't remotely care, because that energy is exciting to me. That unpredictability is exciting to me. I'd be giving him notes of you haven't set this up enough, and maybe we could... He doesn't want to hear that. He's no interest in doing that at all. And it's very important when people talk about anybody writing for TV, any show that they've just watched, where they go, I mean, I love this episode, and then this finale happened, or this episode happened, and it was such a crappy finish. It was and that's because that writer doesn't plan enough. It's because that writer keeps using Deus Ex Machina finales. By the way, it's never a term more overused and misused. That writer keeps doing this wrong, blah, blah, blah. And it's hang on, but the methodology they used to get to that ending that piece of television you didn't like, is also the methodology they used to get to all these episodes you did like. You can't hold their methodology accountable for the show that they make when it worked for you as often as it doesn't work for you, because you wouldn't have the good stuff without... These things are a price you pay.
That term that you just said is massively overused. I don't think I've ever heard anyone use it.
Let's hit this. Deus Ex Machina, God from the Machine. And what it basically says is, in a Greek tragedy, the hero would find himself trapped in a prison and can't get out. And a god would literally come down and let him out so that the story can carry on.
Okay.
And it's a complete con. It's
right.
It's the audience don't think, the hero's really done something to get himself out of that situation. It's the gods do that. Now, to be fair, that's coming from a period where if you believe in those gods, it's perfectly reasonable that one exists there, but it feels dramatically unsatisfying. Now, sadly, what happens now is people talk about those kinds of endings. For any ending they find remotely unsatisfying, it's a bit convenient that just reset everything and put the world back to rights. Well, it's convenient, but convenient doesn't mean Deus Ex Machina. I've seen it said about, Jurassic Park, the T-Rex comes swooping in at the end and bites the Velociraptor just as it's about to attack. The T-Rex saves the heroes of the movie. It's not a Deus Ex Machina. The T-Rex was in the movie from way earlier in the movie. Number one, you knew he was there. Number two, you knew he ate other dinosaurs. That's set up. You see him munching on Gallimimus and chasing him around. And number three, you know he's out of his paddock because we've seen him go through to other...
Right.
It's so set up. What you mean is, it's a bit contrived, bit convenient, and maybe that's true. But it's not a Deus Ex Machina. It's not the... People wheel out the Latin because they want to say, this show is wrong. It's not to my taste. It's not a bit unsatisfying. It literally broke a rule that you're supposed to follow.
Would it be correct to say, had a lightning bolt come out and killed the offending dinosaur, that would be Deus Ex Machina?
It would be, although you could very easily build that in quite quickly by setting up the lightning storm a bit ahead of time, having hit two other things first that are made of metal, and then putting something metal in the villain's hand at exactly the right moment. Then he drew the lightning in, so it's just about... Again, though,
you'd have to set it up.
But you'd have to set it up. And the thing is, I don't know a writer, I don't know a show that has literally done a finale moment like that with no setup, with nothing at all that led into it. I don't think it happens. I don't think... I could... There's even in... What's the movie? Adaptation, they talk about it. Maybe you could do a Deus Ex Machina, ironically. If you're doing a movie or a TV show, if you're doing a story about the mechanics of writing and how sometimes you can cheat, and then you do the cheat. But even then, you've set that up as the kind of thing that we would do because we're talking about the mechanics in a literal fourth wall-y kind of way. Nobody does an actual Deus Ex Machina finale. Nobody does. They know audiences will balk against it. They know how unsatisfying it is. But people wheel out the Latin Because then instead of, I didn't like this and it's not for me, they get to say, this show is faulty. It is broken. It's like it's got a mechanical problem. And I know that because there's Latin that describes it.
It also sounds a bit intimidating and impressive to throw out the Latin.
Absolutely
and
does.
And it makes people think, I better shut up now. I won't be able to hold my own with this person.
Yeah.
He knows Latin.
Yeah, it is. It's a way of trying to shout people down. And the joke of it is most people who wheel out the term don't know how to use it properly, or are using it as a quickie touchstone to not really hit the thing they're actually trying to say. They just want to shut the argument down, and it more often reveals ignorance than the other thing.
Can I just say, one of the bonuses of living in America is nobody throws out Latin.
Right.
There's no Latin reference.
I think you'd be surprised among... Well, you know what, though? It's fans. Nobody in the writer's room would do it. but fans will do these things.
Because you've worked with so many different writers, I wonder if you've seen sort of a pattern in a process, because you've worked with great people, not just the ordinary people, but really solid, successful
ridiculous
writers.
Legends that I'm not worthy to even hang around.
Ridiculous legends. Yeah. You've worked with ridiculous legends. So when you've been going through the Red Dwarfs, IT Crowds and Chewing Gums and more, are you seeing, this is what separates this person from the rest of the crowd, that they're doing a similar thing?
Yeah, I definitely think this comes back to voice again. There are writers who have found their voice so clearly that if I read a page of their stuff cold, I would know it was theirs. I don't think, if you read something of mine, I don't think that would be true. And this is what I mean about finding your voice and edging towards your voice. The flip side of that is you can risk becoming a caricature of yourself. We're doing Red Dwarfs 11 and 12 at the moment, and one of the things that we're all being quite watchful of, I think, is not just doing rhythms that we've done before. Because once you've done so many series of a show, and that show has that particular voice, it's very easy to have the characters say phrases that were kind of like phrases they said in the previous 3 series. You've got to be quite watchful of that. You've got to be quite watchful of repetition without... Because TV episodes are by their nature repetitive. They have one episode after another, after another, after another, and they have roughly the same kinds of shapes and structures. Within that repetition, you have to keep being new and inventive and interesting and exciting. And one of the ways you do that is by not just using a formula for dialogue, you get a page of Red Dwarf and you know Doug's written it. You can smell it on the page. It comes off it in waves. Michaela, the same thing. Graham, the same thing. There's a real... Those voices are really there. But more than that, it's about diligence to the craft, and in particular, the willingness to rewrite. If I give notes to Doug, to Graham, to Michaela, the next draft that turns up has probably less than 50% and probably less than 25% most of the time of what was in the previous draft.
Wow.
Because they go, no, the fix is to properly write it this way now, not to kind of copy and paste. One of the best pieces of advice I ever heard for rewrites was don't rewrite the final draft document, the script that you already have. Open a brand new, fresh document, start writing, and if you need to copy and paste the odd line, description, whatever over, do that. But don't tweak.
Right.
Because you will under-tweak. Your gut will under-tweak it. And actually, I have this thing called the anecdote test, right? Which is that if you're planning to write a comedy story, in particular a comedy story, but really any story, you should be able to tell it as an anecdote. And that's how Hollywood pitches work, right? You come in the room and you pitch the story.
It's Red Dwarf meets the Love Boat.
Right. But more importantly, you do the beats of it. So you go, so the guys are investigating this underwater base, right? And they discover that everyone's died here, and they all died by killing each other, which is really, by suicides. They all died by suicides. Everybody. It's really odd. And we found this weird squid ink that's knocking around. Anyway, hang on, the squid's coming for us. Jesus, the squid's coming. Get back to the ship. And they get in the ship and they fly off. And the ship crashes and they all die. Only they don't, because they wake up in an alternate reality. And it was nothing that they were doing was real and hasn't been for years. And they find out who they really were. And Rimmer discovers that he was actually this brother to the person that he hates. And the cat, who values cool above everything else, finds out he's the dorky. Do you see how interesting every single beat of that is? And then eventually it's, and the squid ink actually made them all hallucinate. This didn't really happen at all, but it drives you to suicidal thoughts and puts you in a place where you want to kill yourself. It's so easy to tell the story like that. It's so easy. And you don't have to do a line of dialogue. You can feel why things are interesting. Yeah. This character is being challenged by this. I don't need the joke that goes with why a dorky cat is funny. I know you'll find those when you get on the page. This is the anecdote test in a nutshell. This is how you know whether your story's good. Because if you sat opposite someone in a pub and tried to tell it to them, how bored would they get if you kept going? And then he went to the shops, and the shops was he bought some stuff and had a funny interchange with the person across the counter. And then he went to a post office. And if you're using "and then," you're in trouble. Right? Because of this. However, the anecdote test. And applying that on a broader scale to script rewrites, it's, well, I knew the first draft that I had written. This happens. Now I've had my notes, I've had my feedback, I'm going back for a rewrite. Well, you remember what the main parts of your script were the first time, and you know what you want to change. If you fall in love with particular lines of dialogue, the odd one here and there may be fine, but you should be able to tell the new draft like an anecdote, which means you should be able to go to a fresh page and hammer it out. And all the bits that were really good from the previous draft, you'll remember.
Yeah, you should remember.
They will be in your head enough that you can drop them in. And if you can't remember the best, character did a really funny metaphor and I can't remember what it was, that's fine. We can pick that up and drop that in. But all the big important story beats of it, all the guts of it, should really still be inside you. You should be able to tell that story and you should be excited to tell it. And when you're tweaking your old version, that's not exciting. When you're tweaking your previous draft, eventually you'll get round to that towards the end when you have to do little tidies. But when you're coming in for your big second and third rewrites, it should be fun to go and hammer out this new version with those old ideas, these new ideas, and it should be like telling the anecdote.
And how many rewrites would be typical?
Oh, it varies vastly. I mean, I'd be very little has anything less than, I don't know, 6 or 7 probably.
Wow.
But
I feel so much better.
Yeah, no, you're only ever chiseling away at it. People who talk about it like it's a block of granite and you're trying to get a statue out of it, that's not unreasonable. You didn't know what it is. I did a Q&A session at the Rain Dance Film Festival the other week, and with 2 guys who'd done web series, brilliant, funny, interesting, inventive stuff that they were doing, and they were asked, what would you have done differently, knowing now what you know. And one of them said something, I can't even remember, said something about, well, we wouldn't have spent all this time on these extra characters because it turned out that they weren't really what the story was about. And the other guy said, you know what, we wouldn't have written episode 1 because episode 1 was just all set up. And in the end, we dropped it so that you could actually get things started with episode 2 and it felt punchier and more exciting. Both of those answers, what it boils down to is, I wish I'd known when I started writing the show exactly what the show was. And that's all you're questing for the whole time is, oh, that's what this is. You find so many scripts, you'll change over the course of rewriting and rewriting. You'll change maybe who the characters even are, maybe what the setting is. Bit by bit, things will shift and alter, and some of that because of demands other people place on you, and hopefully most of it's because of demands you place on yourself and changes you agree with. But as a whole, you're looking for what this really is. And what it really is takes ages to find. It takes rewrites and rewrites and rewrites to find, oh, if only I'd known that this was the actual funny character, or this guy, this woman, they should have been the lead. And I'd got the wrong person as the lead in the show. I've made the least interesting character the lead in the show because I find it easy to push them around. Whereas this is the funny, interesting side character who should actually be in charge of the show because they're the one that are going to drive the plot into funny, weird, interesting places.
With how fast, though, TV turns around, how do people have time to do 6 and 7 rewrites?
I mean, you build it in, but you work like a dog. But to be honest, it's a luxury because that assumes you've already got a series. If you've been commissioned, chances are you're already that productive. That's the truth of it. People can tell. Like I've got a thing actually that I've co-written with 2 other people that's going around at the moment, and we have really dragged our heels on writing some sample scenes for it. We know what the show is, but we can feel a lack of interest from the people who've commissioned it. And so our lack of interest comes. Now, we don't look like reliable people at that point. We don't look like people who will deliver. Why haven't we delivered sample scenes a week after they asked for them? And the truth is because of the way that relationship is. But if you're trying to impress, if you've got a channel and commissioners who are excited about your draft, get a new draft to them. And if it takes you 3 weeks to get a new draft to them, they go, oh, that's a pretty good turnaround, all right. If it takes you 3, 4, 5 months, they go, God, is every script going to be like this? Again, this is about professionalism. How long you take, how well you do. And some of this isn't even your fault. I've co-written on scripts where we've got the commission and then we've got a producer and an exec producer between us and the channel. So Me and the co-writer have to work it up, and then the producer weighs in, and we rewrite, and then the exec weighs in, and we rewrite again. That means it takes 3 times as long to get it back to the channel, and we look like we're being slow. On the other hand, you don't want to deliver a rubbish script to the channel, and if the other people are giving you good feedback, blah, blah, blah. But certainly the job is to be productive, and be productive fast. You can't turn around 13 Doctor Who's a year, even if you've only written a third of them. You can't turn that around if you don't have productivity,
Right.
if you're not... And that's the difficult thing with the UK, like you say, because writers aren't being paid enough to devote themselves so utterly fully to any one episode of anything. Right. But the flip side of that is you have to get really productive over 4 or 5 different things at once.
I got to meet years ago, back I think 2008, with the late Jeffrey Perkins.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and he had just read a script I'd written, and he really liked the script. And I was sort of a bit, because he said, I watched your pilot and I liked your pilot, but I really liked your original script you wrote. And he goes, leave it with me. And I was pretty gutted that I didn't hear back, because I thought, I guess he didn't really mean it. And then somebody casually said to me, have you heard back from everybody in the UK? And I was like, I never heard back from Jeffrey Perkins, and I really thought he liked it. And they said, well, he's dead.
Oh, no,
and I
no,
was
no.
and they said he fainted in Oxford Circus and fell in front of a truck.
Yeah.
And it was one of those blip, just an absolute, and he got tickets to take his family on the night to the theatre, and there was theatre tickets all over his desk.
Yeah, it's horribly sad.
It was horribly sad, but that meeting was so precious to me. I mean, I was just so grateful always of people who give their time when you're on your journey.
Yeah.
And he sat with me, and he had read the script, and he was giving me feedback and giving me positive encouragement and talking about Jennifer Saunders. And he was saying, well, this is what Jennifer used to do when she was on AbFab. And he was having a bit of a moan saying, yes, of course, she was a genius, but it was hard to get her to deliver the scripts on time.
Sure.
She was notoriously late. I mean, that's so unusual to me that you've got this one woman. I mean, was she just writing all by herself those episodes?
Well, I think she had Ruby Wax was a script editor, so I feel like somebody's pinging backwards and forwards there. And this is important, actually. The nature of a script editor varies vastly from show to show. I always say that there's broadly 3 types, that you have a conduit script editor, which is what they have on soaps, where as much as they are giving you notes, they're as much feeding information backwards and forwards. They're sending your script up to their bosses and making sure you're delivering on time, and they're also feeding information down, like actor availability, and this episode's now moved to a different place in the run, so the soap storyline in it is going to have to change. There's a lot of back and forth. It's a very kind of administrative role, which is not to take away from it, but it's more than just feedback. You can't just love the creative. Then there's a kind of contributing script editor, and that especially happens in comedy, which is if only these scenes were funnier.
Right.
And they will be there to help you punch it up. And and it's almost like crediting a co-writer without having to credit a co-writer, because they didn't quite do that, and you still had final veto, but they did come in with a load of stuff and you whacked it in. And I'm neither of those. I'm what I call the consultant, and that's, I've got this script, what do I do with it? How is it? And they give it to you, and you look at it for, okay, what I want this show to be is completely irrelevant. My job is to get you to the best version of the thing you're already trying to write. So you read it and you go, you're trying to do this, and that isn't paying off quite right. And I know you want that to be a huge payoff, so here's some ways we can maybe do that. This first act doesn't really give us the motive for everything that happens after it, and I know you want everything that happens after it to go, so let's find a way to build that first act up. And you focus on that. And so I don't know what Ruby's working relationship on AbFab was. I was nothing to do with any of that. I was miles away and tiny and young. But certainly, you need to look at script editor as a credit and know that you don't know exactly what that role was. Ruby could have been writing jokes. She could have been doing story sessions in the room with her, or she could have just been getting one draft sent to her just before the shoot and saying, here's some fixes, go back, or she might not be doing narrative fixes at all. You no idea. Credits don't so rarely reflect accurately the process. Director on TV means something different from director in movies, and that's bizarre. You go and watch a movie, and the 10 best, funniest moments in a comedy, that writer who came up with those might not even be credited, but the caterers are.
Right.
You know, there's no way to know for sure. You see it in reviews a lot, actually, is that the director gets credited. So-and-so directs from a quite feeble screenplay by, or makes the best of a not great script. And you go, how do you know the script wasn't great? And then the director got hold of it, changed it all, and shot that. You don't know. So I'm always very wary of like looking at whose process it is and how, and because everybody finds their own path through these things. With Michaela Cole, I sit in the room and we hammer out story together. With Graham, he has all his separate pieces of genius, and he works with Steve on Count Arthur or whoever with his own things. And then he gives me a draft, and usually the first draft comes through, and it's, look, this is just pieces that I've glued together. And my job is, right, okay, so let's find the best connective tissue, or does this part even go with this part? And that. Graham once said that he wished that I came as an app, and I feel like a lot of the writers that I work with feel kind of like that what they really want to do is feed the script into the app and have the app spit out what things aren't justified, what character decisions aren't making, what bits don't fit together, blah, 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 blah.
What about Red Dwarf? What's that?
Red Dwarf is very, very much that. Is very much I get emailed the scripts, but there's an interesting thing where I'm a little closer to the finicky detail. With Graham, by the time it goes to the studio floor, I've backed right the hell away, or he's backed me right the hell away. Because there's no point me feeding back on this line, this joke particularly, because he knows jokes. I don't need to worry about that. But also, he's going to take it to the floor and workshop it with his cast, and that's going to see it blossom and change anyway. Me sitting over his shoulder going, she can't say that, actually. He'll work that out. That's going to figure itself out. With Red Dwarf, it's precision written very early. So by the time it goes to the floor, it's pretty much locked. And the concern is that little things will slip through where you go, we haven't quite mentioned that this device does that. So when it does it later on, it doesn't make sense that it does it because we never knew it could do anything like that. You've got to put the word time displacement or something in early so that when we do something time displacey later, because you've set up the gadget but not what it does, and it's different, you know. So with Red Dwarf, generally speaking, it's very similar to Graham. The scripts come in, the emails come in, and the thing. Although actually, I've done some stuff in the room with Doug. I did on Red Dwarf Back to Earth. I didn't really on Red Dwarf 10, and then on this one, we've just done a big day of going through the scripts and kicking it around a lot, and that's been really great. But mostly it's emailing the scripts in and emailing the notes back. But I do it to a little bit later stage on Red Dwarf because those little finicky details really start to matter because it's sci-fi, I think.
When I was being dropped off at your home, because I don't drive over here in the UK, we passed Staines, and of course Sacha Baron Cohen hailed from Staines, and I wondered if you'd ever had an inspiration to follow in that route where you're a writer-performer.
Christ, no.
No? Just out of the question?
You know what, I there was about a week where I was hanging around with some stand-ups. I'm working with some stand-ups on various, because stand-up comedians really benefit from a script editor because they're looking to write half-hour comedies a lot of the time. They're having done a lot of stand-up. They're now like, no, let's try something for TV. But they haven't got the tools yet to build stories and characters quite that way. They've got an eye for character and an eye for incident, but building half-hour formats is still, quite alien because they've had no practice at it. So I really like working with stand-ups, and I'm doing more and more co-writing with them, and actually that's been great. But I'd been hanging around with them long enough that I thought, well, I've got some funny things I could say. Why don't I go do some open mics and all of that? And you start doodling little bits down, little routines, little thing. And and eventually I just went, I'm literally never going to do this. That you couldn't, I would have to be so drunk and so, I couldn't bear the idea of doing it. I love, don't get me wrong, because I karaoke for my heart out. I will go out and... We'll do it. We'll go and do it. I love that to death. And the first time I did it, I got over my nerves quite quickly. And now it's just a thing I just dive on and embrace. And actually, public speaking in general was something I would fear as a bullied kid from high school. You figure nobody wants to hear from you. But actually, I've done enough university talks and things like the London Screenwriters Festival and all these other things where I've gone up in front of a group of people and done Q&As and panels. And actually, it's fine. And I've finally, although I'm still a bit grab the microphone and notice me, I've now overcompensated. Like I say, somebody said to me, oh, you're a bit confident on the microphone after the last one. And I'm not sure if that's a compliment or a concerned piece of advice. But
you're not stuck for words. I'll give you that.
That's true. You have to interrupt me because it's the only way to get me to stop. But for sure, no, stand-up, performing, acting, it's just not in me. It's just not in me.
And do you have aspirations about crossing over to go into American projects?
You know what I'd love to do? My wife's American, and so I feel like we would be able to go back there for a couple of years and cope, just because she's got family and we'd have a support system, and it would be easy to go over there without feeling like an alien.
And you could work legally.
And I could work legally. And I would love to do a year, maybe 2, in an American writer's room, just for the learning experience, because I feel like it's one of the things that the British writing system can't finance and doesn't have, is the team writing room. And the greatest thing about it is what a brilliant apprenticeship it is, because you come in as a writer's assistant, right? You with aspirations and dreams, but you were whatever, and you're around it. So for the first year on that show, you're around the show and the writer, and all you're hearing is the people who are really good at it pitching good stuff, and you're watching them build stories and tell stories with good character arcs and all these other things. And then maybe you're a junior writer the next year, and then maybe you're a regular staff writer, and then maybe you get the proper episode credit for one on the next one. You've just had 3 years of the best education in TV writing that it's possible to get.
Right.
And you've been paid the entire time.
You mentioned about tools. Stand-up comics often don't have the tools to understand how to go about writing. I think everybody's had a unique journey, it seems, as a writer. Now, for myself, I very much consider I'm on this journey still. I didn't have the privilege to go to a fancy college. My life, 20 years ago, I was married to a fighter pilot, a Canadian fighter pilot, and I was on a base in Germany, and I wanted to become a screenwriter, or to at least learn how to do screenwriting. And they had a movie cinema on the base. Wayne's World was playing. So I went to see Wayne's World 17 times, and I took a pen light and a notepad, and I wrote out the script of Wayne's World so that I could time it out. And I literally was like 3 minutes, 30 seconds. We meet Rob Lowe, who I guess is the nemesis. And so I analysed it to bits because I love the movie. Again, I did not have the privilege of going to a fancy school. So for me, it's very much always been a self-funded books, watching stuff, talking to people to learn this craft. And as I say, still very much on it. I love taking workshops whenever I can. Improv I found invaluable for learning about writing. What sort of advice can you give to people who want to learn this? How can you do it if you don't have, you know, $50,000 to go off to a school?
Well, the education's a complete blip, because to be honest, I did a film degree and I did a master's degree, and what I learnt was the stuff in the gaps. We went and got a camera and we had a crack at making stuff. Nobody taught us those bits. And I wrote screenplays. I wrote screenplays. Terrible scripts that you couldn't show to another human being, but you get a lot of bad habits out of your system and a lot of terrible ideas out of your system. I wrote a 3-hour movie about a bunch of soldiers from a future war walking home because the government had decided, we're not paying for your transport back to your loved ones. You've been such a disappointment. And it was not only ridiculously pretentious and with no understanding of the military, because I was a 19, 20-year-old who was at university who grew up in a middle-class village. But it was 3 hours long for what amounted to basically an hour of story. And I just go, no, but I love talking, so I'm just going to keep talking. And I learned it was rubbish because I went and looked at it a year later and it was rubbish. Nobody had to tell me. Nobody has to tell you these things. You can find them. The interesting thing about sitting and watching a movie and writing the script out is that you start looking at how a script works. These days, obviously, you can go on the internet and get 500 screenplays straight away. And go and get Aliens, because it's a really good script. But I'm someone who hates scripts, right? I'm a script editor who hates scripts, because scripts are a blueprint. Scripts are not the building. If you go and look at a brilliant building, nobody's a fan of architecture says, yeah, but you want to have a look at the blueprints for how it was really done.
You want to look at those support beams,
right? People who read scripts and say that's how I'm learning how to do writing, by all means learn the methodologies from that. That's fine, because that tells you how to do slug lines and dialogue breaks, and it teaches you how to do the scene description efficiently and all of those kind of things. But it also, if you're using the actual screenplay, it contains all the stuff they cut out of the movie because it didn't work or it was slowing things up. Well, don't write the screenplay with all the boring stuff in. Try and write one where you wouldn't have to cut a single line. You still will, but you try and write without that. The best way to do it I always think, is look at things and see how they work. You go and watch a half-hour sitcom, and you eventually notice these things don't have a first act. Half-hour sitcoms don't have a first act. They have a quick recap of who the character is. Morning, Frasier, how are you? I'm Dad, I've got a date this evening. Cut to, Frasier's on his date. Oh, there was basically no setup there. He doesn't even really need to say that. You can start the thing with him on a date and the plot's already running. First episodes tend to have a bit more first act to them because you have got to get everyone through the door and, introduce things, although nowhere near as much as people think you have to do that. But sitcoms don't have it. And I nobody told me that. I found that out by watching so many sitcoms that eventually you realise, oh, God, just structurally, they just get going. They remind you that so-and-so's personality is this, and then they introduce the problem that will be their problem for that week's story. Go and watch stuff. More than anything else, go and watch stuff. But also, find things that... Improv's a really great one. If you want to do... If you want to learn about invention rather than... Because it's very easy to write things on a court. I know this scene is going to end like this. So both characters seem to be talking about everything like they already know how the scene's going to end. And it makes your show passive. Whereas if you turn up and go, hi, I'm here to return this thing, and the other person puts an immediate, interesting, pull that out and use it and block it and change it response from in improv... Oh, shit, well, now this has got a lot more complicated for me and I'm going to have to work harder. Great. Characters should work harder. It's fun watching people try. Watching people try is one of the great things in narrative.
Mm-hmm. What about books? Have you read certain books?
My problem is this. There was a period where, on Twitter, I used to say, go and get a copy of Save the Cat. And the only reason I recommend Save the Cat is it's really short.
I have Saved the Cat.
Right. It's really short. It's really quick. And the basics are basically fine. Like, it's useful to know that there are act breaks and the thing. But then it gets stupid about it. It starts writing about how Memento didn't make any money, and that's proof that it's not a very good script. And it's like, no, you can't talk about these things this way. When any screenwriting guru starts making so much money out of telling you how to write stuff, I get a bit itchy. I get a bit uncomfortable. And the truth is, all the screenwriting books basically say the same things. They basically talk, if you want to call it a 4-act structure, if you want to call it a 5-act structure, I don't mind. We only use the term 3-act structure because it's been around for so bloody long that we keep saying it. But as far as I'm concerned, movies generally, they have a first act, they have a second act that's split by a midpoint in the middle, and they have a third act. Well, that's 4 acts straight away. And if you want to talk about how at the end of the second act, everything gets so bad and all is lost and it all goes wrong, well, that's maybe 5 acts. Call it whatever you like. That terminology is only useful for other people talking about it that way. What you have to find is a methodology for writing your stuff. So if you find a great screenwriting book that suits you, use it as much as it is useful to you, but don't obey it. It's back to the Bible. Don't just read the book and go, all of this is true and correct. If it was all true and correct and this person had nailed the perfect formula for movies, they'd be the richest screenwriter in movies. And they never are.
Right.
I mean, I go and do these panels. I go and do the Screenwriters Festival and stuff once in a while. But I want to be very clear. I don't have all the answers. I'm going to sit there and talk, but it's only, look, based on experience, this is the kind of stuff that's kind of worked for me so far. This is the kind of understanding that's worked for me so far. I would feel very uncomfortable giving you a book where I say, I've nailed it, I've figured it all out, and this is how you make money doing the thing that I do. Well, what sitcom of mine have you watched? Because they're all someone else's sitcom that I script edit. On the other hand, anecdotal evidence can be really useful. I worked on this show once and these things, and what we found was this. That stuff, benefit from other people's wisdom, but find the stuff that works for you. Don't feel like one person. Everybody who wants to bring up a particular scriptwriting guru's book, and we know who we're talking about, I don't know respect for that at all, because if they assess your script via a checklist, they're not assessing the script. Now, the flip side of that is there may be a dip. The second act may really dip, and it's because they haven't found a really cool point in the middle where it turns.
Are you talking about Sid Field?
Amongst others. It's important to find a way to make all those pieces of advice, all those books, to make them subservient to your instinct. So you read a book, you watch a movie, you watch a TV show, you read a screenplay, and you feel it sag somewhere, or you feel like something's gone wrong because you've just tuned out. You were fascinated, bored, and something happened. What happened? Well, nothing. And that was the problem. Nothing happened. The character had this problem on page 15. They've got the same problem on page 25. And they seem to keep talking about it rather than doing something about it. Now, you can say, well, of course, I've read the book that says you should never have passive protagonists. They should always be... Well, never is a big word. Nonetheless, you find where your instinct was. Oh, I was bored. I tuned out of the script. And then you go, actually, you know what? That's like that thing that guy said in that book. As long as you do it that way, it's fine. But you respect the page first. You look at the text first, and you try and tune into it. Because it's your job... As an audience, it's different, but as a script editor, your job is to try and tune into what they're trying to do, not to be, well, I'm an indifferent audience, you have to keep impressing me. You tune into this to what the material is trying to do, and when it meanders away from that, when it's suddenly going, oh, you're trying to entertain me and you're boring me, then you look at why. And if something you read in a book is useful, great. But the book isn't the way to test everything. The book is the useful advice to look at once you're having a reaction. As long as you're doing it in that order, find whatever books you like.
How do you know when you're done? If you do 7 rewrites, how do you know you don't need
You're
an
never
8th?
done. You know when you're done broadcast. I mean, when you take a script to the floor, you've got to be so confident in it. I am certain this is going to work. I have to be pretty certain this is going to work. If you're not sure... Oh, somebody said to me on Twitter the other week, I've just finished a script, I've done all the rewrites, blah, 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 I'm about to send it off. What's the last thing I should do? And I thought for a minute, and I think the answer was... Read it through one more time, and you know that bit where you fudged it, but you think you've got away with it? You haven't. Change it and fix it. Because there's always a million fudges. I don't really believe this character goes there for this reason, but if I just say, I'm going to go there, and then they turn up, I think it's okay. It's not okay. Somebody felt weird. Go and fix it. Why not? And writers who hold themselves to that standard are the ones that go places. Right? Writers who go, I already know, I haven't nailed this, and they don't hand it in and say, this is definitely finished. One of the pieces of advice I give a lot is don't write 6 episodes of something, right? Don't have an idea for a sitcom, write episode 1, and then go into writing episode 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That, in theory, is okay practice for you finding the show and the rhythm. But when you go to a production company and say, here's my script, you're going to give them the first one, right? So why hasn't the first one got all the effort in? Instead of writing 5 other first drafts, do 5 rewrites on that first one. But also, if you go to the production company and they say, this is pretty good, would be interested in a second script, at that point you can go, okay, you can pay me for a second script. Right. If you say, I've already got one, well, number one, you've just done yourself out of money. Right. Just as a practical consideration. But number 2, all you can do at that point is lose the job, because you can give them episode 2, and if it's not better, not just as good as, if it's not better than episode 1, they go, oh, that thing I fell in love with in the first one, it's kind of not here in the second. Maybe this isn't for us after all. They're more likely to turn it down. If it's on par, if it's as good as, if it's better than, again, you could have got paid for that. What were you doing? Right. If you're going to write 6 episodes, don't do 6 episodes. Write 3 pilots. Apart from anything else, if you get that script to somebody and they do love it and they do hire you for it, you've just written a load of stuff freelance for nothings, for on spec, and you can only sell it once. If you write 3 pilots, you can sell it to 3 different places. It's about being pragmatic with your own,
Thoughts on discipline, which I think is a big problem for a lot of writers. Do you go out to coffee shops? Do you sit solitary and write?
I don't, and you know what? I'm the worst person because I'm terrible. I'm absolutely the last minute guy. When I wrote After Death, I pitched story ideas, wrote an outline. They sent me the notes back on the outline. I wrote, I think, a new outline based on those notes. But when it came to writing the screenplay, I think I had 4 weeks to do it in, and I wrote it in the last weekend. Wow. I didn't do it for 4 weeks. Now, you have to balance that slightly with, but I was thinking about it the whole time. Like, it was always in the back of it, come on, what about this bit, what about... And you start arranging pieces of it in your mind. So it's not that you're not working, but what you're doing looks suspiciously like not working. And it's very dangerous. And any grown-up, any sensible human would say, I'll do 5 pages a day, it'll be fine. And they would get up, go to a coffee shop, start at 9, be done by 1, and they'd have the afternoon off and they'd feel very good about a day well spent. I don't. I get up, I go, I'm going to definitely get round to this today. No, not quite. And then I spend the evening miserable that I've achieved nothing and now I have to do twice as much tomorrow. And then it happens again. And then it happens again. And frankly, not very professional.
Who have you seen that's got the good discipline, and what can we learn from them?
Well, Michaela, like I say, Michaela's a machine. And Graham is too. Graham's one of those people who, he is, again, one of those people who will let it stew for a very long time. There's an interview he did on Screen Wipe with Charlie Brooker, and it was something along the lines of, it's like building up to a really big poo. That you hold, the longer you've held on to it, when it finally comes out, it's this enormous thing.
I feel he would be so much more capable of another analogy.
Yeah. Well, there's a difference between writing it down and talking about it. I'm more eloquent on the page than I am in person.
But for him, he said that
I
right.
understand, but I think that's true for everybody. But no, you have to not miss a deadline. I mean, that's what I will say, actually, is that I asked for 4 weeks to write a screenplay. What days of that 4 weeks I took to write the screenplay is up to me. That's my problem. As long as they get the script on time, they don't care whether I wrote it over a weekend, unless it looks like it was written over a weekend. And thank God it didn't, because, like I say, I gestated it a lot. It had been going around my head, and the story had been really heavily interrogated, because even the first outline I sent to them, I'd been through a version on cards on the wall, and so by the time I did my first draft, the story had been through 4 or 5 iterations, and that's really useful. So then it's just about dialogue. It's almost just about dialogue. It's about execution. And in theory, that's the fun bit, because once you get on a roll, everyone starts talking, and that's great, which is why you can do it over a weekend. I couldn't plan a screenplay over a weekend. I'd go insane. But you can certainly, generate the layer over the top that is dialogue and execution. And, that then went through umpteen rewrites before it went to shoot. And,
I've heard a lot of votes for the coffee shop for writing.
Yeah, no, I know a lot.
J.K. Rowling famously writing Harry Potter in coffee shops all over Edinburgh.
You know what? And I tried that for a while, and it kind of works, but I'm not a coffee drinker. So I have to sit there with hot chocolate, and that just means I get fatter. And I feel more sluggish as the day goes on.
What about tea?
I'm not a big fan of tea either. But no, I do drink tea, but I see the value of it. I know so many writers who do it, and one of the reasons it's good is it gets you up and moving. I am going out to work. Rob Grant, I think, and he may have been quoting somebody else, but Rob Grant said the hardest thing about being a writer is getting dressed in the morning. Because why would you bother?
Right.
If you're just going into the next room to sit at a thing, why wouldn't you just sit there in your pajamas and dressing gown? And I would. And actually, that has been a thing. My back started giving me problems a couple of years ago. So I couldn't go and write in coffee shops anymore, because then you hunch over the computer and you lean forward. Can't do it. It's murderous. It's ruinous for me. So I've got a treadmill and a desk. I've got a treadmill desk. I'll show you after this. And it's literally that. You walk while standing and typing.
Holy smoke.
It's amazing. I'm such an advocate for it. I think everyone should get one. I think young writers should get one before they do themselves physical damage by being sat down too much.
I would think your fingers would be sort of wobbling with
No.
the walk.
You find a very constant, gentle rhythm, and you keep the base of your palms on the rest in front of the keyboard, so that keeps your hands stable. And what it means is I do my 10,000 steps in a day while working, and now I feel like I'm going to work.
That's awesome.
Because I get up and I put on my proper pair of walking trainers. You can wear your regular clothes. It's not sweaty intensive, but you put on a proper pair of trainers, and it means that while you're writing all the time. Now, the downside of this is it's only good if I'm writing, if I'm doing dialogue, if I'm doing scenes, if I'm writing actual content. If I'm coming up with ideas for how a story fits together, it's useless, because I can't do that in front of a screen. I have to have my whiteboards or my notebooks. How I build story is away from the computer. And that's the other thing about going to the coffee shop. There are writers, again, who can come up with their story that way in front of the laptop. But because I can't, the coffee shop's no use to me for that one either.
Fascinating. Andrew, this has been truly insightful.
We've been all over the place.
We have time traveled in your life, and it's just been great hearing, insights into how other people who are making a living, doing what they love, It's fantastic, and I'm really grateful that you took time out to chat.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
And everybody, where's the best place for them to see Afterlife? After Death? I hate to say it.
After Death is everywhere. It's on Fright Fest Presents. Their website is the link to it. But, you know, also find me on Twitter. I'm at EllardEnt. It's supposed to be Ellardent, but everyone thinks it means Ellard Entertainment, so I'm stuck with that. Or AndrewEllard.com is my website.
I thought it was Ellard Entertainment.
Yeah, everyone does. It's supposed to be Ardent, like Ellard, but Ardent. Somebody coined it on a Red Dwarf fan site years ago for me, and I went, oh, I like that. I'll use that as my Twitter handle. And then it turns out, no, I have to explain it every single time. It doesn't work.
Andrew Ellard, thank you for being on the show. As always, I'll post links, photos, and more at thegreyescape.com. Come and find me on Twitter, that Natalie Gray. Say hi, tweet. It's manly. Tomorrow, guess what? I'm interviewing Right Said Fred. That's Right Said I, the legendary guys behind the infamous, unforgettable little ditty, I'm Too Sexy. So that's coming. We're going to see what's up with them, what they're doing in their recording studio in Clapham, in London, hardcore and old school. That's coming to you soon, along with more awesome guests as well, I promise you, on The Grey Escape. Please, if you can, take a moment to rate The Grey Escape on iTunes. I'll know you did it, and you'll be my favorite. Post a review, and I'll tell people you're my favorite. So there. Thanks for listening. Stay well, look after yourself, look after others, and I'll catch you next time on The Grey Escape.